Evening, and thank you for coming, everybody. I know we have lots of supporters in the room. That feels really good. I'm Erin Casey. I'm a self-employed communication professional, activist, and parent. I worked at UPEI in a few different roles from about 2009 to 2013. I was also a graduate student in the Faculty of Education.
I'm Wendy Carroll, an associate professor at St. Mary's University. I worked at UPEI from 2008 to 2013 as an associate professor and interim vice president of student affairs. We're pleased to be here with people who care deeply about this important issue. We are here tonight to join the call to end the misuse of NDAs in cases of misconduct. This is our first time speaking publicly and sharing our experiences. A little over a year ago, the University of Prince Edward Island released us from our non-disclosure agreement. We'd signed this agreement 10 years earlier, in circumstances in which we felt we had no choice, and had lived in silence for a decade. We were prohibited from talking about what had been done to us or how the institution responded when we reported sexual harassment. We are two of very few women on record who have been partially released from this kind of NDA. Since July of last year, we've collaborated with the new leadership team at UPEI, particularly Board Chair Shannon McDonald, on a reconciliation process that we believe is unique. In the past year, we received a public apology, given a victim impact statement to the Board of Governors, and led the university to publicly acknowledge their failure to meet some of the terms of our 2013 settlement. This process of reconciliation is challenging for both of us. We acknowledge the willingness of the UPEI Board of Governors to be courageous and their risks as we walk this path together, a path we're still walking today.
Our experience is not unique. Each day, people are silenced after reporting sexual harassment and misconduct in the workplace. Most of these victims are women, although we know people of all genders are harassed at work. The silence of an NDA protects perpetrators and the organizations they work for, not victims. This silence leaves victims voiceless, trapped in pain and suffering, unable to heal from trauma, unable to protect others, and unable to access support or justice. Tonight, we'd like to address 3 common misconceptions about NDAs in cases of misconduct. 1, that signing them is a choice victims make freely. 2, that they help victims move on with their lives. And 3, that they mitigate organizational risks.
We'll start with claim 1. Signing an NDA is a choice. Signing an NDA, even with the advice of legal counsel, is rarely a fully informed and free choice. Let us explain why. Although many of us like to think that organizational and legal reporting systems are neutral and unbiased, women who report sexual harassment often face an uphill battle within their organizations. The work climate can be hostile for them, especially if they've reported on someone with institutional power. They can experience retaliation from superiors and from colleagues. They can be seen as a threat that must be contained, rather than a victim who must be supported. The stress of reporting can have serious repercussions for their physical and mental health.
After we reported sexual harassment in the spring of 2012, we navigated more than a year of litigious and hostile internal and external reporting processes while continuing to work for the institution. Our legal costs were significant and mounting, our mental and physical health was eroding, and we were the subjects of gossip and speculation across campus and in the community. There was no privacy. This chapter of our ordeal culminated in a 12-hour, one-day mediation, at the end of which we felt enormous pressure to sign a settlement agreement. After legal expenses, the settlement left each of us with a very modest sum of damages. But for us, the mediation wasn't about a payout. It was about making sure that what we had experienced never happened to another woman at UPEI. So we negotiated for the adoption of a new policy at UPEI that would prevent any of the university's presidents, now or in the future, from being the final arbiter in cases where allegations were made against them. This policy change, which the university was contractually obligated to enact, was never implemented. This is now a matter of public record.
Equity and fairness in these cases is an illusion. Institutions almost always have deeper pockets than victims, as well as all the power to make decisions about a person's employment. The coercive efforts of this imbalance should not be underestimated. A mediated settlement can, at a certain point, seem like the only option to victims who are paying their own legal bills and suffering because they have chosen to report and pursue justice. In our case, we were traumatized, exhausted, afraid for our livelihoods, and indeed for our futures. We agreed to silence as a condition of the settlement, a settlement we desperately needed in order to get on with our lives. It felt coercive and unethical. And it was also normal practice, then, and unfortunately still today. The difference now is that public awareness around NDAs has given us a shared understanding of vocabulary to challenge what is normal. Remember this: most people who claim that signing an NDA is a choice are not themselves victims, nor do they have lived experience of the consequences of an NDA. Many lawyers, including Ron Pink, who was our lawyer at the time, are beginning to recognize the harm caused by NDAs. Ron is now an outspoken advocate for banning their misuse in cases like ours. But NDAs are never about privacy for victims. After all, victims can negotiate the confidentiality of perpetrators and organizational leaders without signing away their own voices. NDAs are about preventing women from speaking their own truth and warning others. They're about protecting the interests of powerful people and organizations.
Now on to claim 2. Silence helps victims move on. NDAs actually intensify harm to victims and keep them tied to the past. Victims of sexual harassment can face profound professional and personal harms. Take a moment and imagine, if you need to, what it's like to be harassed, bullied, and threatened by someone with enormous power over your career and livelihood. Then imagine how it would feel if you could never talk about it, never ask for help, never explain why you have gaps in your resume, never share with friends and family why you aren't the same person you used to be. In our case, we both felt there was no option but to leave the institution and the province and start all over again in Nova Scotia. It took years for us to recover from PTSD, something that never completely goes away and can be triggered at any time. It took years to rebuild our lives and careers. There are losses that can never be recovered, friends and colleagues we will never see again, harms to our spouses and children that can't be undone. Now imagine, after nearly a decade, that the person you accused, who has remained in the same position of power, has been accused again, and still you have no voice. To describe this as heartbreaking barely scratches the surface. There is overwhelming grief and anger, which destabilizes victims' very sense of self and destroys our faith in the systems and communities that are supposed to protect us. Ultimately, people who have been silenced by NDAs eventually break under the burden of carrying others' secrets, especially if new allegations emerge.
Finally, claim 3. Silence mitigates risks. NDAs were never intended to cover up misconduct, yet they have become a very powerful and common legal strategy to mitigate the organizational risks of workplace harassment and abuse. The prevailing logic that silencing victims protects an organization's reputation and deserves the greater good for more people is simply not accurate. NDAs don't mitigate risk, they delay it. And while the risk is delayed, it grows. Perpetrators keep operating, scandals deepen, cover-ups become more complex. Eventually the truth comes out, and when it does, it can be devastating and very costly. In the case of higher education, these financial costs come from public funds. We estimate the cost of managing risk for the university, in our case alone, was in the millions of dollars when you include legal fees, settlement costs, administrative resources, and the investigation that followed the new allegation at the end of 2021. So why the university pledge is so important? Using NDAs to silence victims forever is unconscionable and dangerous. Traditionally, higher education is where we develop our best selves, incubate our best ideas, learn how to think and criticize, and build a better world based on research and evidence. It's time for universities and colleges in Canada to live that mission. The research is clear about the harms of silence to victims. There are other ways to both protect victims and give them a voice. We are grateful for the leadership provided by Acadia, Atlantic School of Theology, and King's University in publicly acknowledging the need to ban the misuse of NDAs and take action within their institutions.
So what do we need? Let us be clear. There is no situation in which making the victims sign an NDA is good for them. We're here to encourage all universities to learn from our experience and refuse to silence victims for life. We ask all universities in Canada to sign the pledge and take a public stand against the misuse of NDAs, to examine and change internal policies and resources so they are victim-centered, and to publicly stand with victims. Finally, we're asking universities to make things right by releasing victims from historical NDAs signed as part of misconduct cases. Universities are places where we challenge what is, imagine what could be, and work together for a safe and equitable world. Signing the pledge is part of this work. When we know better, we need to do better. Thank you.